Hello and welcome to BusyWorksBeats.com. I promised you a free mixing course because you voted on our community tab. I said, I'm going to do a free course for you. What do you want to know? You said mixing and mastering. I said, okay. And then right here, we're recording after 2,000 votes. Thank you for watching. Today, we're going to focus on compression. What is it? How to use it? I'm going to simplify it so it's not way above your head. And I'm also going to describe some advanced technique so that you can see how far you can take compression. And I'm going to break some myths even. So let's hop into the DAW. I'm going to move from Logic over to FL just to show you how you can apply this to all DAWs. Let's switch over to Logic real quick. So in Logic, the reason I'm here is because they have a really good compressor that's just built into the stock plugins. You have to understand that stock plugins aren't always the greatest. This compressor is really good. So what we're going to do is compress Carl's vocals. And you're going to understand the gist of compression through this plugin alone. So there are different types of compressors. We'll go through the different types. And then let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay, boom. So the first parameter with compression is not just the threshold, it's the input gain, okay? So with compressors, they work most of the time off of what's called a threshold, or a point in which once a sound goes above a certain point, let me go big screen. This might be big screen convo time. Once a sound goes beyond a certain threshold, let's just say this arm is the threshold, my vocals are right here. So my vocals are saying stuff, they're just doing stuff, whatever. Then once it goes past that threshold, the compressor smacks the vocal down or does whatever it does, smacks it back down in this case, and it flattens out some of the pointy parts of the audio. So instead of it being like a straight up vertical line like this, it bends it and curves it down and pulls it down a little bit. So that's what the compressor is doing when it goes past a threshold. Okay, so, and then you have to set what's called a ratio and all this type of stuff. I'll get into what that means. Okay, so the first step though, most people think threshold is the only step with a compressor. No, it's actually the input volume. It's how heavy are you going into a compressor. The biggest mistake I see a lot of producers make is they're going into a compressor way too loudly. They're sending too much signal beyond the threshold. So they'll come into the threshold way up here. The vocal's doing all this and everything's just being pulled down and the compressor's just working overtime because of the input gain. So sometimes your track is just too loud going into a compressor. Now I'll exaggerate this by amplifying up the input. And then I'll turn down the output to compensate. So I'm clipping going into the compressor. See how it's like, you can hear like the breaths. You can hear the background noise in the studio. You can hear everything. So what a compressor does is it pulls up the volumes that you can't normally hear. If you go back to the Fletcher-Munson curve, let me actually pull it up real quick. Remember in video 1 how we went over EQ and we described the Fletcher-Munson curve. So certain frequencies we just can't hear to the natural human ear. And we need a compressor to pull up those volumes so that we can hear them more naturally. That's what a compressor is doing. So we can hear everything naturally from 500 to about 5K. But what about all these other frequencies that are just in the background? You know, the room sound, like listen to the background. You can hear the guitar from his headphones because now the compressor's pulling all that forward. And it's making that frequency distribution a little more even. So instead of EQ just boosting certain sections, this is actually making all those sections more even. So imagine that Fletcher-Munson curve, but just an even flat line. That's basically what a compressor is aiming to do. Okay, so that's the first step people overlook is the input volume. Okay, so we want to leave room for the compressor to work. And most people, they just overly compress. Okay, so that's the first step. Next step is the threshold. This is the line that basically once you go past this point, the compressor starts working, I'll say. So if the threshold's at 0, nothing's happening. It's not, unless the sound goes above 0 in this case, which again, depending on the input volume, it can go above 0, okay? Okay, so let's pull this threshold down until we start grasping some of that vocal. Now, when you're compressing vocals, you compress differently than compressing a song. So I'm not saying this is just the do-all for every single song, but the general starting point for a compressor is negative 20 dB. Now, if the compressor isn't moving, in this case, you want to push up the input gain. Now for this vocal, I can take out a lot of dB because this compressor sounds really good. Now, what is the compressor doing? Again, I got to go full screen to just recap. So the compressor right here this is the threshold. This is the volume of my vocal. The input gain, let's say my vocal's way down here. The input gain is just moving that point closer to the top. Now, once my singing goes above that threshold, the compressor pulls it back down and makes it more linear, okay? So that's what it's doing. If I go above that point, then the compressor comes down and pulls down the volume of that specific vocal. And the reason that's important is because it creates a consistent experience throughout the vocal take. In this case, just the vocal. So I don't want you to be afraid to take out volume. You could push compressors really hard. In this case, we're taking out we're taking out 5 dB. The meters in the middle of compressors usually show you how much dB you're taking out of a sound. And all we did was just set the threshold. We didn't really do much of anything else. So the next tab to look at, some compressors are set to 1:1 by default, meaning it will look like this. And the needle won't move because the ratio means how much volume, once it goes above that threshold, what's the ratio of volume that we're going to take away from the sound? Okay, so if it's set to 1:1, it's not taking away volume. It's just letting the sound go above the threshold. Now, if I set it to 2:1, then it will take out 2 dB per every 1 dB above that threshold. You don't need to know the math. You just need to know that 2 dB is a gentle compression, so it pulls it down a little bit. 4 dB is a harder compression. 8 dB is really hard. And then anything above 10 is basically limiting at that point, which is like that flat line. So let's put it on 2:1 ratio. Now, when you're taking out volume from the top, I'm going to show you an FL, but basically when you take out volume at the top, now everything becomes quieter. Okay, so what we can do is add makeup gain to turn everything back up. So if I'm taking out 2 dB up top and everything goes down 2 dB, or excuse me, not everything, but the peak goes down 2 dB, now I can turn everything up 2 dB and it creates more loudness because now everything benefits from me chopping off that, what we call a transient or the pointy part of an audio. We now have more room to boost everything. So this is where loudness comes from. So I just gently look at the meter and I say, okay, we're taking out 5 dB. Now you can set it to auto gain, but let's turn that off. So I can boost up to 5 dB. Now you want to think about an average. Remember that every peak is not 5 dB taken out. So if you're boosting too heavily on the makeup gain, you can actually do things later down the line. So I wouldn't recommend boosting unless you have to boost out of a compressor. You also have these things called knees. A knee looks like an actual knee. What does your knee do? It bends. So it's the bendy part of the compression. You can't see it. There's no visual for it. So the knee kind of is arbitrary. But I would say for more dynamic vocal performances, you would use what's called a soft knee. For more aggressive performances, you want a hard knee. You don't need to memorize that right now. The second thing, or the fourth thing actually, we're going to focus on is the attack feature of the compressor. Let's take this off auto. Now, if the attack is really fast, this basically grabs everything that goes above the threshold right away. So the threshold is like, I'm trying to think, what's that movie, Life, where they go beyond the gun line in Life? I think that's the movie called Life, right? With Martin Lawrence and Eddie Murphy. Let me go full screen on this one. So if you remember in the movie Life, where Eddie Murphy and Martin Lawrence are in that movie, and they're in this prison and they go beyond what's called a gun line. So the gun line, consider that the threshold. If prisoners escape and go past the gun line, because there's no walls in this like outdoor prison. So if they go past the gun line, the guards have the right to shoot at the prisoners, but they don't shoot them right away. I know this sounds crazy, but if the prisoners in that movie Life go past the gun line, they can go out maybe 20 yards, 100 yards before the guards even start firing. So what happens if, what's my analogy here? I forgot the parameter we're talking about here. Attack. Okay. So if the attack, think about a literal attack. So if the person goes out and the attack is 0, that means they will attack the moment that person crosses that threshold. They will literally start attacking. Okay. But if the attack is like 20 yards out, 100 yards out, they won't start attacking until they reach that point. Now, of course, they're aiming as they're going. They're not just like standing still. And then once they're at 100 100 yards, then they aim. It's they're aiming, and then when they get to the 100-yard mark, they attack. So think of attack literally as the gun line from the movie Life, because it's the same concept. Okay, so it determines when the compressor is going to attack and then how much it's aiming. So attack is not just nothingness and then onness. It's actually a gradual getting to a point and then it attacks. So if I set this to 100 milliseconds, which is what, 0.1 of a second, it lets a lot of that transient energy pass the threshold before it even begins to start doing what it's going to do. So you're going to get a lot more transient heavy punchy stuff. I did that on purpose. Punchy. Okay, stuff coming through, and that won't take away from your performance if you increase your attack. Okay, so for most vocals, you're going to let that transient come through. Your release time is how long it takes to go back to, they used to call it recovery time. It's the time it takes to go back to normalcy. Okay, so the release time is it will cut out volume, and imagine it going up gradually back to normal. It dips and then it slowly goes back. So that determines how long the compressor pulls down that volume. Basically, if you want to use that analogy from Life, it's how long the guard shoots at the runaway prisoner, the release time. Now he could shoot for 2 seconds, he could shoot for 10 seconds in just one shot. Okay, so that analogy will help you understand compression. Now in this compressor, you also have what's called distortion. This is what takes this compressor to a different level. Now I'm not sure what comes first, the distortion or the compressor, but there are techniques to where you chop off what are called transients or the pointy parts of the audio with distortion first, and then you go into a compressor because now you can pull everything up a lot louder. So I'm not sure what comes first. I'm pretty sure they have this afterwards, but take care of the transient. This even has a built-in limiter. Now I'm pretty sure the limiter is after your output gain. I'm not sure actually. To test it, I'm gonna make it. Looks like it's not after, which is weird. You'd think the limiter comes after the output gain, but I guess not. So you don't need to know what I'm talking about right now. That was just more for. So if you want to push a compressor hard, the question is, do we just turn up the output gain or do we turn up the input gain? Because now we have everything set. Do we want the compressor to feel more that fill-in sound? Because now we're picking up the background guitar. So the problem is not that I want the compressor to work harder. The problem is that I want the volume louder. So in that case, we would pull up what's called the output gain. I give it favor. I do this. I know. Give me out. I give it later. Let's switch to compressor types. Now, I'm not sure if it keeps our settings or not. I think it does. Okay, so it keeps our settings. So this here is the VCA compressor. There are different types of compressors. Some mixing engineers will give you like the purpose per type. In this case, I'm just going to tell you to listen to the tone. Listen to how the compressor works. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Okay, let's turn this down to be fair. So you can't really hear it because I'm not pushing the compressor. So I'm going to push it a little bit harder. I give it favor. I do this. I know. Give me out. I give it later. I give it favor. See how this is pulling out way more than this compressor here? So the compressors work differently in the way they detect audio in that case. And even when I set this to default, is at negative 20 dB, which again is a great starting point. Okay, so let's switch it to the FET. They coded it to look like the 1176 front panel. You'll hear that name a lot, 1176. This is very common for vocals, FET. Give me out, I give it later. I give it favor. So very subtle differences. I'm just going to show you this because I want to show you how like a good stock compressor sounds. Now this one has a lot less knobs. Okay, so go from here. We don't have the attack and release on this one, so we cannot determine that parameter, which makes this compressor a little more simple, but it gives you a specific sound because of those things.
Let's get it later. I won't go, I give it favor.
Okay, so it sounds more linear from start to finish. This looks like an SSL front.
Let's get it later.
So you're not really hearing much difference. I'm not going to sit here and bore you with every single setting, but I wanted to show you in Logic first, because once you understand that, you can move to any other DAW and use the same exact parameters. It's just that the compressors are just either better or worse. Okay, so this vocal is kind of sitting in the background. We want to pull it out. Let's add the fruity compressor here. Now we know what threshold means. It's the gun line. Okay, we know what attack means. It's how much time it takes for the guard to aim and shoot. Okay, the ratio is how, what type of weapon they're using, basically a sniper or they're using a pistol. Okay, the release time is how much they let off their attack weapon. And then the gain is, I haven't come up with the metaphor for the gain just yet. So let's use this on this main vocal here. Now, the thing is, you can't see the fruity compressor, so it's harder to teach on this one. But now you understand, let's make it 2-to-1 ratio. Now, if you can't hear compression, turn the ratio up to about 2-to-1 and then slowly pull down the threshold until you hear it taking out the volume. Remember, that starting point is about -20 dB. I can hear the compressor. Then we're gonna pull the makeup gain back. Now the type is the knee. So you can switch this to different soft knees or hard knees. Remember, the problem might not be how much you're compressing, it may be the input volume. So sometimes, notice how I had to crank this 14 dB. What I'm gonna do instead of cranking the output is crank the input. So this is the step a lot of people miss. They forget that compressors are triggered. So what I'm gonna do now is open up a parametric EQ2. On the far left, we have a gain knob. People overlook this. And I'm gonna push this going into the compressor. And it will give you a different tone now in the compressor. I'm gonna exaggerate it. Now, another cool thing you could do, now this is exaggerated because I'm pushing it so you can hear. Another cool thing you could do is EQ going into a compressor. So what I could also do is add what's called a high shelf. Going back to our EQ tutorial, I'll link it below. You could push the high frequencies into a compressor to exaggerate the high frequency content. This is used a lot in vocals. So now when it's compressing, it's biased to that high frequency information. So some people ask EQ before or after compression. In this case, we're doing that to push certain harmonic content through the compressor. So we're going to go before. Usually I put EQ after the compressor. The compressor's job is just lift all the things that we can't hear in the vocal up front. That's the main job. And to make stuff a little more linear. So let me give you a visual compressor because that one is hard to understand because there's no visuals. Let's pull up the Fruity limiter. Let's go to compressor mode. Now you're like, where's my attack knob? Where's my, all the things that we talked about. So the threshold is right here. This is that gun line, remember? Let's pull this down until we, now you can see the peaks. Can I pause this one? Let me see. Yeah, I can. Okay, so if you notice, there's peaks going above that blue line. That blue line is, again, the gun line. The peaks, consider those the prisoners going past that gun line. Okay, so now I need to set a ratio. How much volume are we pulling out of? Notice this diagonal line is saying how much volume are we pulling out of the signal that goes above that point. And then we need to set a threshold to make sure we're capturing the peaks here. And then when you see these little lines dipping, that's the gain reduction or how much volume we're taking away from the sound or the top parts of the audio. The attack time, remember, is how long it takes for this to actually gear up, I'll say. Notice how if I don't have a lot of information coming through the threshold, it's not working very hard, which is good. It's fine. But remember, we want our, let's put it to negative 20 dB. Now what I'm going to do is open up that EQ and I'm going to push volume going into the compressor. So you're going to see, let me move this out the way. Hopefully you can see, let's see what we can see. Hold on. Okay, so now I'm going to push the volume going into the compressor. So this white area will become taller. Remember, basically mirroring the prisoners moving towards the gun line. Oh, I don't have the EQ on. That's probably why. Let's do this again. Now those peaks will become higher up. Now, because we recorded at such a low volume, that's why I can push it that heavy. If you record super loud, you're not going to have that much room to boost because it's already loud. Let's start giving it a bias now. I'm going to boost the highs and then boost everything into the compressor. Hear that sheen silk sound? So that's a better way, in my opinion, to compress than just the main key is input gain. Okay, that's the real secret. Now let's use the saturation to take care of some of those peaks. Now you can really push the input gain. Let's lighten up on the threshold a little bit. You can see stuff starting to clip now. Let's pull this threshold down. I give it paid up. Tell me I swear to stay up. Let's get it laid up. I won't go, I give it made for. I do this, I know. So here's without. It's just kind of there. Here's with the compressor. I give it paid up. Okay, so that's how you can get that sound to stick out a little bit more using compression. A little harder to do in FL because you have to know how to do stuff back to back. Again, here's the 1176. I just want to show you what this classic compressor looks like because you'll see this a lot. So I'm just pushing the input. Remember, the input gain determines how much energy goes into the compressor. Now their attack knobs are opposite. So 7 means fast. I don't know why they did it that way. I guess how hard the compressor works on something or how fast it works on something. And so the right 7 value is actually fast. To the left is a slower value. So they're looking at it almost like a mixed level. So now that vocal's sitting right on top of the mix. Now I probably wouldn't push it this hard. Now they have different ratios here, 8:1. Now I usually compress my vocals 8:1. It's usually 4:1 or below. So hopefully you get a better grasp on compression, when to use it. Now let's compress one more thing, which is the mix bus on this track. Now I'm going to use the UA version real quick. Let's pull it down a little bit. We don't need to crank it. So I'm trying to really come up with a better analogy. Basically, when the vocal is going up to that threshold, the more you push the input gain, the more filled the sound becomes because you're smashing it against that threshold. Now it's just becoming it's like putty. Imagine putting putty in a cup. Not the greatest analogy yet. I didn't think about this, but putting putty in a cup, the more you push it, the more filled those holes become in the putty. And that's what we're doing with the vocal. I'm going to push it into the compressor so it fills in those holes that make it feel thin. And it's usually harmonic content that makes it feel thin. Or the way the frequencies are made. Okay, so now I'm going to add a compressor to the entire track. And I'm going to use, what is it? Acoustica Audio. This thing's called the Coral. I don't use this all the time. I just got it after having thousands and thousands of plugins. This is the first time you're using this. So don't think this is the only plugin. I'm just showing you this because I'm showing you it. I like the sound so far. So what do we have? A threshold. We have an attack knob. We have a schmod, which I think stands for the ratio. And we have different modes and the mix level here, which is how much, and then the makeup gain. So you're starting to see the same terminology through different compressors. I don't know what mod means, SH mod. Shape modulation, maybe the shape of, I don't know what that means. Okay, but just pull the threshold down. The shape, I'm trying to think what shape of what, maybe the curvature of the compressor. So now I'm adding compression on the entire track. It's making it snappier and tighter. So I'll turn the drums up a little bit by running them through a tape machine emulator. The drums sound off because I have it going through an analog loop. So what I'm going to do is record the drums, and I'll pause the video so you don't have to watch this. Another thing compression does is just tighten up stuff or make it feel like it's all together. So what I'm going to do again is use that Coral plugin, but let's solo just the drums on this one. Okay, so here's before this plugin. Actually, there's an on-off button. Let's turn it off. I want you to listen to how wide the drums are and how like loose they feel. Turn off my headphones for a sec. Okay, so now I'm going to turn the compressor on. Listen to how tight up the sides sound. Here's with the compressor off. Now listen to the sharpness of the kick and the snare as I turn it on. Okay, so let me show you what that sounds like. Just before even understanding compression, let me show you what it sounds like using sound design. So what compression is doing in this case is making the sound snappier. So here's what it's doing to the volume of the sound. So before the compressor, the sound just is doing its thing. It's like this. Now as I'm adding compression, it's making the drums snappier. Here's before. And then after. So that's what it's doing to the audio, is giving it a different curvature. It will look really something like this, more of a curved line like that. So it's taking that drum that may look like this and making it more like this. And it feels snappier, feels more dynamic because of the shape of the curvature. So that's what it's doing. Compression on your entire track. It's called mixed bus compression. Let's open. Now, if you're noticing the subtle details there, every time that kick hits, it pulls everything down. So it's like poof, 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 poof. It dips down the volume. I was going to say the kicks. The kick dips down the volume every time it hits. So that can get annoying sometimes. So what you want to do is with other compressors, like let's say the SSL bus compressor. These are not stock plugins in FL Studio by any means. Showing this to you. Where's it at? Classic compressor, bus compressor. Here we go. So this is by IK Multimedia. But basically what you can have here is a sidechain high pass filtering to where you're not listening to the low frequencies going into the compressor. So again, when you understand input gain, you will understand what the sidechain is doing. So it's listening to all the things going into the compressor, and it's saying, okay, we're not going to listen to the frequencies below a certain point. It's similar to when I had that EQ going into the compressor. It's listening to the high frequencies at a louder volume, so it reacts to the high frequencies more. And the sidechain isn't boosting or biasing. It's just not listening to stuff below a certain point. So if it doesn't listen to 150 and below, every time the kick hits, it won't trigger the compressor. It's not necessarily leaving the bass out of it. It's just saying it won't trigger. So in this case, you know, if we want to make the metaphor that Life movie, it's like, okay, certain prisoners are known to run away, and we expect that. Okay, so we're not gonna shoot at them. We're just gonna let them run because we know they're gonna come back and go back to the life, whatever it's called, the place they were at. But some prisoners are like really trying to get away. So that in that case, we only look for those types of frequencies that are really trying to get away. We already know the other lower frequencies are just gonna turn right back around and come back. And so using that understanding, I can now grasp the concept of understanding a side chain input going into a compressor. So it's not that the gun line just magically is off. It's just that it's not listening. It's not looking for those prisoners. Or even a better analogy is maybe some prisoners are so sneaky that they can crawl and they're not detected by. That's actually a better analogy. Some prisoners can crawl their way past the gun line. They're not detected by the radar system. That's actually a way better analogy. Okay, so it doesn't mean it's not compressing the lows. It just means it only attacks when it sees the frequencies it's listening for. And it affects everybody. Because you could be crawling and then a guy's running next to you and then the guard is aiming at the one running, but it hits you. If you guys ever play Call of Duty, you know that your teammates get you chopped up most of the time. I usually set mine, if you're using a bus compressor, to 30 milliseconds and 0.1 seconds, which is 100 milliseconds release. If you're gonna do mixed bus compression. And again, the threshold, let's just pull this down. Now, when you're compressing everything, the goal is not to squash it. It's just to make it a little more glued together. Usually 1 dB is good enough. You don't need to overly compensate here. You're just trying to create those little tiny grooves and just have everything together. See, with this other compressor having those two, it's just too much compression. Now, this is not how I compress. I'm just showing you different concepts in different stages. Okay, so if you want me to compress something very specific, let me know. I'm going to end this video here because this has been a long video. We've been going for 30 minutes now. I want to appreciate you. Please like the video, share the video, subscribe if you're new. This is the new free mixing course right here on youtube.com/BusyWorksBeats. Subscribe if you're new. If you want free courses on mixing music production, go to premium.busyworksbeats.com. That's how you get free courses. I'll leave a link below. Peace out, guys. Subscribe if you're new. Peace.